This is Greg Collins, Substitute Teachers Lounge. Now, before you say, Greg, you can't have a kangaroo court in the classroom. You can't let those kids make decisions about other kids. Well, hear me out. You know, it's kind of funny. I remember hearing Jerry Seinfeld saying one time that when you're a comedian, you never can really turn things off. I've heard Paul McCartney say the same thing about being a musician, that your mindset is always looking for new song titles, new jokes. And because of that, everywhere you go, you hear things. I remember Paul McCartney saying that he heard somebody say salt and pepper in a restaurant one time, and he thought they said Sergeant Pepper. He thought it sounded like Sergeant Pepper, and that's where he got the idea to write that song. I've been trying to do the same thing the last few weeks. I listen for things because I thought these last few weeks, I've got maybe 3 weeks before we do the Back to the School episode, and I want to just kind of do some things that are out there that maybe you would never try. For instance, kangaroo court. Maybe something even I won't try, but I heard it on a movie the other day. Now, when I came up with the title and then did a little research, I kind of had second guesses about it because, to me, from my childhood, kangaroo court is when you let the group around you, like, for instance, if you're in a fantasy football league, you let the group decide the outcome of something that maybe one of the managers did to try to take advantage. That's kind of a kangaroo court. It's when informally you let a group make decisions about their own peer, so to speak, if we can use that word. Now, there's some very negative connotations if you just look the phrase up in a dictionary about it being unjust, unjust decisions, that kind of thing. That's not really what I'm looking for. Have we come to the point that to maybe take a little pressure off teachers, off of substitute teachers, maybe to help the kids realize it's not just me making you do this. The rest of the kids in this classroom think you should do that too. Is it time we look for a bit of a kangaroo court? I've got some ideas, none of which you might use, some of which you might try. I'm even going to mention something automated by the time the episode is over. These last 3 episodes before we start back to school are kind of going to be bullet episodes and just quick thoughts, throw them out. If you got comments, go to Substitute Teachers Lounge Facebook page and talk about it. But I thought this would be a good topic to talk about this week. First of all, can you think what would happen if you walk into a classroom for the first time? Now, I picture this probably in the older grades, but the tool, the concept could be used in the younger grades. What if you just walked in and said, listen, guys, I don't know what's going on at home. I don't know what's going on when you get out of this classroom, but I do have to be the person that kind of keeps things organized in this classroom. Sometimes you may feel that I don't do what you think is fair. So one thing that I've been experimenting with, that I've thought about trying, that I might try in this class before the time is over, is what's called a kangaroo court. That means I might choose maybe 5 or 6 students, and if one of you does something that I don't like, I'm going to let those 5 or 6 students decide what your punishment should be. Now, first of all, can you imagine? Just think back to when you were a student. If a teacher walked in, substitute teacher, whatever, and said that in the classroom, maybe you'd be a little bit nervous. Here's why you'd be nervous. Because there's a decent dose of kids out there that would want to suggest some very strict punishment just because they don't like the person that got in trouble. So you can't have that. Also, there's going to be some kids out there, I see them every day that I teach, that kind of think it's cool to stay in trouble. So they might do it just to see what that kangaroo court is going to decide about them. So You have to fold all that into the picture. Here's how I think that you might be able to get away with this and actually let them learn from it. I do a version of it. I've talked about it all the time. I do a version of it in reverse, so to speak. As much as I hate it, getting punished as a class when only a couple of people did something, much as I hated that when I was younger, there's ways I do that now as a teacher. And my way is giving them a privilege, giving them maybe 10 minutes of computer time if they've done well, and tell them if I catch them on any websites that they're not supposed to be on, then the privilege gets taken away from the whole class. That's sort of I call that reverse kangaroo court, where they do something and the rest of the class gets punished for it. I think that makes the student more responsive than if a teacher just tells them to stop, personally. So that's kind of a way I've already folded in having consequences that are based on what one student, have that consequence applied to the whole class. In this case, it's when somebody does something wrong in class. Now, here's what I would suggest doing. What you can't do, you can't just tell the class, all right, Johnny's in trouble. What do you think we should do? Have a few students suggest, write them up on the board, and everybody vote. Now, throw that one out. That's not going to work. That's probably one of the most, one of the worst, perhaps, things you could do. Let's try something again. As I said in the beginning, what if you just went out there and you chose a handful of students? As a substitute teacher, you may not know what students to choose. Now, a lot of times I will go in a class, and in the teacher's notes, they will say something to the effect of, all right, send attendance to the class. Here's a student you can trust to do that. Sometimes you'll get a list of students that if you really need something responsibly done, that choose them. Once you substitute teach for a while, though, you're going to know these students and you're going to know the ones you can trust. Maybe you pick about 4 or 5 of them. Don't just pick one. Don't just pick one to make these decisions. Pick 4 or 5. And then already have some canned disciplines in your back pocket. Okay? Here's what I would suggest you could do if you wanted to take a kangaroo court approach, even if it's just for fun. You could make it, start it out with fun. Maybe have a competition at the board on math problems, and whoever is the slowest answering the math problem, maybe you have the kangaroo court decides, all right, what's going to be the penalty for this person? Are they going to have to go back up to the board again later? Something simple, something not really mean. In fact, I would suggest you make a list and come up with some disciplines that aren't really disciplines, but at the same time, not really mean disciplines. That's what I should say. At the same time, something you can build on, like this. How about last in line for lunch? Now, that doesn't work for a lot of the schools because you just release them for lunch. Maybe you can just say that person's got to stand in the back. He's got to be the last for lunch. I'm going to have the kangaroo court watch, and you've got to be the last person in the classroom that goes to lunch. Now, to be honest, some students would hate that, all right? Maybe a punishment could be this. We're going to have an assignment. It requires a little bit of reading. Johnny, I want you to read this out loud. Or Johnny, the kangaroo court wants you to read this out loud. What it doesn't, I don't think you want to put on your list of punishments that you've got to move seats or you've got to sit in this seat for a while. Maybe that one's okay. I'll let you decide on that one. But again, you don't want it to be anything that's going to be crucial. You just want it to be relatively friendly. Maybe even you could make some fun out of it. You send the student out of the room, and instead of choosing some kangaroo court representatives, you could just have the people vote on it. The problem with voting in a classroom is you have intimidation votes. I mean, a lot of students will just vote because they see Sally voted for something. So they'll vote for something too. And it just doesn't always work out the right way. So if you want to do, just for fun, a couple of kangaroo courts, have last in line for lunch, have all these other types of things. Now, an automated way you could do it, especially if you're going to be long term for a while, especially if you have access to their Google Classroom. It is so easy to design a Google form on which they can go in and vote, and nobody would see them. You got to make sure you set this up correctly because it's not the default, but you got to make sure that you're the only one that sees the results, and you can see the punishments that the kangaroo court, or if in this case, the entire class vote on for that student. So maybe it would be fun. Maybe it would be time to take a little pressure off the teacher. And I say, all right, guys, you tell me all the time that you don't understand where I'm coming from. You're not young. You can't relate to me. On a more serious note, you don't know what I've got going on at home. You don't know what I have to deal with after school's over. And you don't, but maybe some of these students in here do. So why don't I let them decide? Just something fun to play around with. Kangaroo court, maybe you want to try it, maybe you don't. It just popped into my head this week after I watched a show, and I said, well, that's an interesting concept. Let's see what we can come up with, okay? I'm going to go throughout this next week looking for something else goofy to throw out to all you guys to discuss. I'm not sure we even accomplished anything, but it's just a short episode that could be fun, heading back to school. What's some fun things? Maybe I want it themed that way. What's some fun things? Unusual things. Maybe things that we've never heard talked about before, like kangaroo courts. Maybe we need to think of some things that will be fun in class, let the students have a little fun. That's the bottom line here. You definitely don't want to create some kind of kangaroo court that makes people mad, that makes them mad at each other, brings them down, makes them do worse in class. But I think if you do it in a fun way, they'll really enjoy it. So I will see you next week, and we'll try to think of something else just as ridiculous.